Ho, photuon, estin, T. Now, Nancy, if you look there, see that T right there, we were reading T there, and then ute. If you read that in English, it's the same as it is in Greek. See that? Not any difference. And then ho, poshizon, all, ho, oxonon, theos. Now, every now and then I throw a little Greek grammar at you, very seldom, but I do. And tonight I put some Greek diphthongs on the board here. Does anyone know what a diphthong is? What is a diphthong? Okay, it's two vowels that make one sound. Two vowels that make one sound. Two vowels that make one sound. And sometimes it'll change the sound of the vowels altogether. All right? So let's look at it for just a moment. Alpha iota. Alpha iota looks just like AI in English, doesn't it? Greek is so much like English, you don't have to worry about being scared to death. There's a lot of grammar and great amount of vocabulary in Greek. That's what's big, okay? But the language, the letters are so much like English. AI is just like an isle, okay? Alpha iota, and then we have alpha ipsilon. Alpha ipsilon. Now that ipsilon there looks like a U, an English U, but it's I. It's I, and it's pronounced usually by itself like a Y. Okay, like a Y. Like a Y. But here, as it becomes alpha epsilon, it's like Haas. Haas, German Haas. Okay? And then we have alpha epsilon, epsilon iota. Epsilon iota is like 8. 8. 8. The number 8. All right? Ace. Ace. And then we have omicron epsilon, and when omicron epsilon goes together, it sounds like group. 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 Got the row in there.
You have that twice in your grammar.
I have it in there 2 times?
One says group and one says house.
Yeah. Group and house. Either way. Group or house. Okay? And then epsilon, but it sounds like feud when it makes the 2 vowels make one sound, all right? Like feud. And then we have eta and epsilon, and that's like feud also. And then we have epsilon iota, and here's where it changes totally to we. Like huios. We. And we in French means what? Yes. All right. Yes. Okay. And how do you say yes in Greek? Huh? Does anybody know how do you say it in Greek? Nay. Just remember nay in English means no, but in Greek it means yes. Nay. All right. Nay. All right. So when you say nay, you're really saying yay. All right? Did this help you any? A little bit? Didn't mean to confuse you. Greek is so much like English, you don't have to worry about the writing of it. It's only a few letters that are different. All right? Only a few letters are different. Brother David, we just have one more seat left for you. All right. So as, hoste, so as neither the one planting, all right? Paul the Apostle is writing to the church at Corinth. He's correcting them. They had been following men instead of God, all right? They had been following men instead of God. So as neither the one planting, he is anything, and that verse, by the way, estin there, how would you conjugate that estin? Cindy, do you remember how to do that? How would you conjugate that? That's third person singular, present indicative active. I didn't write it down there, but that's what it is. Third person singular, present indicative active. All right? And it comes from Amy. So as neither the one planting he is anything, nor the one watering. The one planting nor the one watering. Now, how many of you ever put seeds out in dry ground, like out in the Sahara or the Mojave Desert? How long could a seed lay out there in the ground in the Mojave Desert or in Death Valley or in Egypt indefinitely. You can have a seed and you can have water, but if you don't get them together, you have nothing. A seed without water and a water without seed is nothing but water and a seed by itself. All right? So as neither the one planting is anything nor the one watering, but the one causing to grow, God. The one causing to grow, God. Now, when you look into the Genesis, the first chapter, verses 11 through 19, I believe, you'll find that when God reconstructed the earth, He caused the seeds in the ground to grow that were already there because they were there from the creation, from the original creation that had been destroyed. They were already in the ground. But what makes things grow? If you even had water and you had a seed, would it grow? What else does it need? What? It needs dirt. What else? One very, very important thing. Sunshine. Light. And over there, it was tohu wavuhu in Genesis 1 and 2. It says, and the earth, haaretz, tohu wavuhu. Wahoo, can't even say anything. Tohu wavuhu. And the earth was full of darkness. Darkness was over there. Well, when there was darkness only, it's not going to grow either, is it? Not going to grow. So God had to put the right mixture together. And as we witness to people, how many of you witnessed to somebody this week? Anybody witnessed to anybody? Just by being in your neighborhood? You know, sometimes that's something, isn't it? Just being there. On the job or whatever. How many of you witnessed by your lifestyle? Just going out in a restaurant and maybe praying. That were. Well, several times in my life, I've gone out in a restaurant, and when I was praying, somebody would come over to the table and say, you're an inspiration to us to see somebody pray in a restaurant. All you did was pray. Just thank the Lord for what you have. But that really means something to somebody. It can mean something to somebody. I went over to Santa Maria one time in 1979. I'd had a real bad stroke of luck. As usual, all bad. My wife had got rear-ended by an illegal alien that didn't have a driver's license, that had stolen the car, and didn't have any insurance, of course. And I ended up paying $30-some-odd $100 to get another car so I could go to school. And I took off to Santa Maria because there was an association meeting, a stateside association meeting over in Santa Maria. So I usually wore bib overalls all the time. Some of you have seen me in bib overalls, not very many. Out on the farm, I wear them in the wintertime. And I was over there traveling in bib overalls and traveled over there. And I threw in a couple of suits, and my wife was supposed to put in the shirts and the ties. And I did have some shoes. Well, I got over there, and I got a motel room that was right out of what they call the motel from hell, you know, type thing. It was the last one. Nobody else was there or anything else. Got in there and got my clothes out, and I didn't have any shirts and no ties. Look. So I went down to Sears Roebuck and I bought a couple of shirts and a couple of ties and everything else, and said, here, I went in there, and I was in my bib overalls because I didn't have anything else to wear, you know. And she, what are you going to do, dress up and go to a funeral or something? No, I said, I'm going to go to a preacher's meeting. Oh, all right. So I witnessed to her a little bit. I went to the association meeting the next morning. We got there, and the next morning, they were going to have a preacher in the morning, the 11 o'clock hour. They were going to have a preacher get up there and preach. Well, the preacher didn't come. And so this guy got up here, and he just turned white when they told him he was the alternative. And I was praying for him all the time he was up there, you know, this guy. And he comes and sits down right beside me, and he's smiling, looks like this, one of those kind of painted-on smiles. He said, "Guess what?" I said, "What?" He said, "Guess who's the alternative for tomorrow? The alternate." I said, "You are. I've been praying for you, brother." He said, "No, you are." Luck. One right thing right after another. There's not much luck in the Word of God. It's all precision. Who's speaking? Who's he speaking to? And what's the subject? Young lady, good to have you here tonight. Are you just coming to this class the first time? Yeah, first time. Let's see, Brother David, can you go find her a book? 1 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter and verse number 7. God does the germinating. What you're supposed to do is get the word out. Get the word out. And then it says, ho fu to on. Day, kai, ho, potizon, hen. And see that? Look what's over that epsilon up at the top. What is that? That's a rough breather, so it starts like an H, doesn't it? And then asin, hekostos, day, tone, idion, miston, leps, ete, kata, tone, idion, kopon. All right. Have you got that opened up in the right place for her? Greek looks so much like English it won't scare you. The one planting, look at that one. The one planting, nominative singular masculine, the one that continues on planting over and over and over again. And also, word kai there, that's a conjunction usually, but right here it means also. It's a cumulative particle. Page 208 if you want to write that down below. And we have a weak adversative conjunction there also, that day. See that one? That's page 85, by the way. And the one watering. The one watering. And one they are. Each one and the one's own. Look at that word, the one's idion. Idion. What word in English do we have out of that word? Idion. Idiot. All right, idiot. There's so many, and that, by the way, that is a medical term. As I've told you so many times, Latin, all of the legal terms come from Latin. And all the medical terms come from Greek. All right, the one's own. Literally the ones talking to themselves, the one's own. Your own miston. Miston. Look at that word miston. Miston is wages. He shall receive. He shall receive. Now, many times it seems like our lives are like somebody rolling dice. We can just ricochet off of all kinds of walls, just all kinds of happenstance in this world. But what you do in this world, where you place yourself in God's work is not a mistake. And God will never make a mistake in rewarding you for what you do. Reward or wages, he shall receive. Third person singular future indicative. And what voice is that? What voice is it? Middle voice. What does that mean? You will receive your own wages. Your wages and not another. Somebody else is not going to receive your wages. It'll never be wrong. Never be wrong. Never the wrong person. I finished reading a book by George Crook, here a while back, on his life. By him was autobiography. And he said there was one scoundrel that he served with was the luckiest guy he ever saw. That's George Armstrong Custer. He said all during the Civil War, when somebody would get a battle fought and won, in would ride Custer right at the right moment with his sword in the air and claim the victory when he had nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it at all. That's not going to happen here. No one is going to claim your reward. You are going to have your own reward. According to your own Kopon. Kopon. Your own labor. There's another place in the New Testament, in the same book, where the Apostle Paul uses this word. 1 Corinthians. Now, I don't have all of my book with me, but you do. 1 Corinthians 15. My book is falling apart so much I only brought part of it tonight. 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter. Let's go and look at what it says over there. 1 Corinthians 15:58. The first part of the book, of the 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter, is about what? The gospel. What the gospel is. No mistaking what the gospel is that Jesus Christ came according to the Scripture, died according to the Scripture, and was raised according to the Scriptures, and he was born in the right house, at the right place, at the right time. Okay? He talks about victory over death and over sin in our lives. And he has this word kopos down here also, another word, kopos. Let's look at this one. Now, let's look at different translations of this, all right? First of all, let's go. Who's got King James? Anybody got King James around here? Huh? Who's got King James? Nobody? All right, young lady. 1 Corinthians 15:58. First.
Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain.
All right, the word labor. Now, we have two words here in 1 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, for labor. One of them is the reward of labor, and the other one is the labor. But let's think about it. Let's see who's the Apostle Paul speaking to here in 1 Corinthians? The church at Corinth. The church has been corrupted, and they've got a lot of problems. They're going to straighten these problems out. He spent 2 years there. He is writing this letter to them, correcting them. All right? Now, let's look at another translation here. Who's got another one? Who can run up here to the microphone? I didn't want to scare that young lady and get her up here. Gabby, have you got your Amplified? Can you come up here real quick for me? The Amplified. All right? The Amplified. 1 Corinthians 15:58. 1 Corinthians 15:58.
Therefore, my beloved brethren, be firm, steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, always being superior, excelling, doing more than enough in the service of the Lord, knowing and being continually aware that your labor in the Lord is not futile, it is never wasted or to no purpose.
All right. Every one of them missed the boat. From Greek. All right. Kopos. Kopos. That little word kopos there. Let's look at it. Kopos or kopon, whatever you want, whatever ending it's got on it. How many of you know what that word really means in Greek? Huh? How many of you know what a trailblazer is? A trailblazer. Paul the Apostle called himself a trailblazer one time. And he used the term pro-copto in it. Pro-copto, which is another form of this. What does a trailblazer do? The Catholics, when they landed over here in California, they went out and they would take their little machetes and they'd chop forward through swamps and whatever. There's a lot of swamps in California at that time. And they would throw down mustard seed wherever they went. And when they came back there a year later, they could see where they had chopped forward, and the mustard had grown up, and you'll see trails of mustard. They could find or trail themselves back from where they chopped with a tree. All right? They chopped. In different places, when people would go through different areas, they chopped notches on trees if there were a lot of trees there so they could follow themselves. But what it meant is to chop forward, to blaze a trail. Now let's look at this in the way that it should be translated here in 1 Corinthians 15:58 and also in 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 8. All right? since that word kopto means to chop or to beat forward, how should this be? It said, how should it be translated? So as, brothers, of me, beloved ones, firm ye become, unmovable, abounding in the work. That's work there, ergo. Now here's another word, ergo. That word is a product of employment, what you worked in. All right, so we got the word mistos, we got the word ergo, which we get ergonomics from in our English language. Of the Lord, pantote, always knowing that your beatings not are empty. Your beatings are for no purpose. No matter how much the world beats you up in what you're doing, how many beatings had Paul taken? A lot of them. Remember when Jesus was beaten and slapped and beaten? They beat him over the head with a rod. They whipped him on the back. They slapped him. These are all beatings. And he said, your beatings are not empty, are not in vain. Your beatings are not in vain. Your beatings are not in vain. So now let's go back here in 1 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter. The one planting, that's nominative, singular, masculine, present participle active, someone continually planting. And the one, and also the one watering, one they are. The Apostle Paul, what he's talking about here, he says, when I preached to you, Apollos came along and he watered. And the church grew. And that's what happens. Sometimes people will get saved years later. I remember one time Hernando Mondragon. How many of you know him? He used to be in the Sunday school class. He still comes every now and then. He goes to a different church now, but he'll come wandering in every now and then. He has worked at Cal State University, Bakersfield, for years. I was his pastor 40 years ago. And I preached on hell one day or one morning or one night. I can't remember what it was. He came forward and he was saved. He didn't want to go to hell. I described that place. And it's real. He didn't want to go there. Well, through his life, he has always been a wonderful witness. And he witnessed to some hard cases out there. And one of the hard cases came up about 15 years later to him, and he said, brother, that was unusual. Adelphi, you know. Brother, thank you for being such a good example to me and putting up with my mouth and all the things that you did for so many years ago. He was flabbergasted. He didn't realize that he had even witnessed to this guy at all, except for what he was. All right? The one watering, they are each one. Look at that word, heskastos. They are each one, and the ones, their own reward, mistos, wages. All right? That's your wages that you get for working. They shall, or he shall receive, middle voice, according to your own hard labor. Hard labor. Has anyone here ever worked under terrible, hard, hot, terrible conditions? Hard labor? Hard labor? It gets pretty hot in a radiator shop sometimes, doesn't it, Brother David?
Sometimes.
Yeah. I imagine your dad, back in the old days, before they had very much air conditioner, it got pretty hot smelling all that acid and those hot tanks and breathing all that stuff and working all the time like he did back then. Brother John, you worked on trains. It got real hot in those trains. Real hot. How many of you, anybody here ever pick cotton? I picked cotton. Out in the sun. We really liked it when the cotton was that tall, you know. You get down there, you're on your hands and knees half the time, picking every piece of cotton off. If you didn't pick every piece of cotton off when you were picking cotton, the guy would say, get back in there, boy. I see white down that road. Get in there. And I remembered my grandmother. I went out there with my grandmother. And they would be out in those fields singing, and she would sing with them. How many of you have ever seen the old Laurel and Hardy movies where the black people are out in the fields and they were singing in the cotton fields? Singing. Singing. Why? Because it was so miserable that they wanted to be in heaven, in the glory land, in the cabin beyond glory, in a little corner of glory land or something. They would be singing those songs all the time, singing themselves into heaven. And out of that hot cotton patch, and out in the oil fields. I was over there working one time in 1965 in King City and San Ardo and everything out there. It was the hottest place in the nation. It was hotter than Death Valley. It was 129 degrees in the shade. We had people falling over dead with heart attacks out there. We were out there in the sun digging ditches and working all the time. Couldn't even get a drink of water because we were in too much hurry out in the oil fields. Hurry up before the coal caves in, you know. That was the whole story. You wish for a little glory land. You wish for a little glory land when you're working hard like that. That's the beatings here. We think about the Apostle Paul, and we think about Barnabas. We think about all these different brothers that were out there, Peter. They didn't go by the Santa Fe chief with air conditioning from place to place over there. They walked. They rowed in boats in the middle of shipwrecks and all that stuff. Through beatings, sickness. Timothy was sick, wasn't he? You drink that water over there, you know what happens? Your stomach turns into a washing machine. Paul told Timothy, drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. Kill the bacteria. Take that medicine. One place to the other over there, it was hard luck, hard abuse. You will not get your beatings are not going to be in vain. You're going to get your own reward for it. 3 in verse 9. Theo. See that word theo there? What word in English do you think comes from that word? Theology, the study of God. So here we have the word theo. Theogar, esmen, sin ergoi, theo, gorgion. Theo, oikodome, este. For God we are fellow workers. For God, belonging to God. Look at that word theo. How many cases are in the Greek language? In the Greek language, in the noun, in nouns. Nouns. How many cases are there? 8. Thank you, young lady. 8. Who else said 8? Cindy? All right. Randall. I know Randall knows it. There is nothing I can say up here that guy doesn't have an answer for because he's been sitting here for a long time. Same thing with this one sitting over here. Nominative, genitive, operative, locative, instrumental, dative, accusative, and vocative. That's the 8 cases in Greek. Remember I told you Greek looks a whole lot like English, but there's a whole lot of grammar to it. What is the genitive case? What does that mean? The case of what? Possession. You belong to it. Oblative is from where it originates. It goes out from there. But right here it belongs to. Let's look what it says. For we are belonging to God. We belong to God. How come we belong to God? Because He purchased us. Paul called himself a what? A bond slave. A bond slave. A doulos. A doulos. He called himself a doulos. What does doulos mean? It comes from deo, which means to bind. What is a bond slave? Paul the Apostle was a freeman, wasn't he? He was a citizen of the Roman Empire. He got his citizenship through his father. He was a free citizen, but he prided in calling himself a doulos. A doulos. Bought and paid for slave. Remember he wrote that little book of Philemon? Philemon. He wrote to Philemon about Onesimus, his slave. And he told him that he'd run away. And he ran into Paul over there. And Paul preached to him, and the old boy got saved. And he changed his life. His name, Onesimus, meant fruitful, productive. But he had run away. He was a runaway. In America, we had a lot of runaways here, runaway slaves. You know where they ran? Huh? Away. They ran down to Florida. Down to Florida. And a lot of the Indians ran down to Florida. A whole lot of Indians and black people ran off into the Florida area to get away. And they intermarried down there, and that's what we call the Seminoles. Do you know the Seminole Nation was never conquered by the United States? Zachary Taylor and Andrew Jackson bought bulldogs. Bulldogs bred with bloodhounds to kill. They killed. And they would take those dogs and train them to kill Indians and blacks. And they'd turn them loose because they couldn't go down. The Indians would whoop the socks off of them down there when they get into the Everglades. They couldn't do anything. They'd whoop them. They couldn't capture them. They couldn't do anything. They were totally useless. So they trained these dogs to kill and sent them in there like what we call warheads today, missiles, to kill these Indians and blacks. Well, they killed a lot of blacks, but the Indians made friends with the dogs and sicked them back on the white people. That's absolute fact. Slaves. Onesimus had run away. He got saved. And then Paul writes this letter to Philemon and tells him, when your slave comes home, remember now that he's not your slave anymore. He is your brother. And you owe me your very life. You remember that when you get this letter. You're going to be ready to beat that man because he shows back up. But he came loose. He came home on his own will. Now, sometime in life we come under the conviction of the Holy Spirit of God, and He convicts us of sin and righteousness and what? Judgment to come. And so we cry out for mercy and we ask the Lord, Lord, forgive me for what Jesus did for me. That's wonderful, isn't it? That's wonderful. You're forgiven. But because you're forgiven, if you're really forgiven. Now, see, that person was under conviction of the Spirit of God. He repented and called upon the Lord to save him. Some people just want fire insurance. Fire insurance. What does that mean? Brother John, you ever see somebody just went forward and they just wanted fire insurance? They went forward and they shook hands with the preacher. They got down on their knees. They got baptized. And they went off and lived like they wanted to live and like they did before. There was no difference in their lives. Now, that kind of fire insurance just doesn't work. They're still going to end up in the same place. There's got to be a change of heart and a change of mind also. And when God has really got a hold of your heart and changed your mind and convicted you of sin, righteousness, and judgment to come, and you repented and called upon Him to save you, He saved you. And when you do that, then you're bought and paid for by law. You're not your own anymore. So then you change your life and you change and you live differently than you did before because you're not your own. You have a brand new Father, and your Father is the King of the universe. The King of the universe. We're belonging to God. We are fellow workers, fellow laborers. Laborers in a field. Like I told you, I used to go out there and I was a cotton picker. I worked in wrecking yards loading iron when I was a young boy. Worked in the oil fields. Out here on Coffee Road, there was a Sunland refinery out there. I worked in that refinery for about 7 years. When they did workovers in there, I got to be the one that went to the towers, those hot towers, shipping coke out of them. I went in and welded the inside of those, breathed that stuff. And in the boilers, we'd throw down boards on the ground because our feet would catch on fire if we went in there without the boards because it was so hot. It'd be like 150, 175 degrees in there. You throw the boards down and the boards are burning, and you're in there changing with these asbestos gloves. You're up there moving the tiles around on these boiler tubes and chipping all the coke out of there. and then throwing it out the door, and the boards you're standing on are on fire. I got an idea of what maybe the Catholic purgatory is kind of like. But you know what? Hell's worse than that. Hell's worse than that. Fellow workers, God takes us and says that we're workers with Him. We're working along with the King. There's nothing that you do for the Lord that the Lord doesn't do in you. You don't do it on your own. He incites you. He tempts you and leads you on those pathways. Belonging to God. And then we have the word gorgion. Gorgion. Now I believe the word Gregory comes from this also. Gregoria. What does that mean? It means to produce, it means to till land. But what else does it mean to do? It means to watch it. To watch it. To watch it. I try to call my students once every week or two anyway. How many of you ever called you? Anybody ever called you? What am I supposed to do? You're my plants. You're my plants. And I need to watch over you and take care of you. Make sure that you're growing right and get encouraged right and all of that. Get a little watering now and then, a little fertilizer when you need it, and a little guidance. Because God placed me to do that. And you will have a garden to work in. You will have a garden to work in. As you raise your children, that's your garden. That's your first primary garden. And then your grandchildren and your friends and your neighbors are your garden. Tillage belonging to God. And then it says oikodome. 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 To dome up. Oikos means house or family, doesn't it? And dome, it means to put a roof over it. You do everything that you can in your life to raise your family the right way. You do. Everything you can. And if you don't have a family, you've got nephews and nieces and cousins and neighborhoods. Neighborhoods. That's your tillage. That's your garden. Mark 16th chapter, 2 Corinthians 6 and 1, Isaiah 61 and 3. I don't know why I put Mark 16 and 20 because that's not in the original language. You can erase that one if it's down there. Isaiah 61 and verse 3, 1 Corinthians 3:16, Ephesians 2:20 through 22, Colossians 2 and 7, and 1 Peter 2 and 5 are all cross references to this verse right here. 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 10 now. 1 Corinthians 3 and 10. 1 Corinthians 3 and 10. Kata. Now that word looks just like it would in English, doesn't it? There's nothing hard about that one. And then the word tain. And then karin. To, just like English, theou. Tain. Dotheson, moi, hos, sophos, architecton. What English word do you think comes out of that? Architect. All right. That's pretty easy, isn't it? Themelion, ethneke, allos, de, oiko, or epi oikodome. Hekostos, de, blepeto, pos, ep oikodome. By the way, there's no room for individual foundations here. No room for individual foundations. According to the grace belonging to the God. All All right, that's what it says. According to the grace belonging to the God, the having been given. The grace having been given. Look at that word having been given right there. It comes from didomi. Didomi. That means to hand over. It has the idea of a race, as a foot race, where we have a baton passed from runner to runner. And you run up so far, and you hand the baton to another runner. That's the idea, to give over. You've run your race, you get over. All right? According to the grace, the charin, that's free, unmerited favor of the God, belonging to the God, the having been given or handed over to me as a wise, a sophos. Look at that word sophos. What is philosophy? It comes from this word, philosophy. What's philosophy mean? It's two Greek words, philosophy, and what do those, brother, love of wisdom. Philo, I love, and sophos. And that word sophos there is a high word for wisdom. The highest word for wisdom that there is. All right? As a wise, as a super wise, as a great, the greatest, most wise master builder. Plato called people that built great societies this word, master builders, that built great societies like Alexander the Great. It's from tecto, or technos, akri, and then technos. In the Bible we have archangels. Archangels. That's the same word here, archangel. What does archangel mean? Head angel. What's the word for this in Hebrew? What would be the word for the tip of the iceberg in Hebrew? What is the word? Rosh. Rosh. Head. Rosh. That's the same word here. Is arche and Rosh are equivalents from Greek into Hebrew, okay? And we have archangel. And that's a Greek word, isn't it? Archangel. Archangel means what? A head angel. Now, how many head angels do we have literally spoken of in the Bible? 3. All right. One of them is named literally an archangel. Who was that? Michael. Michael the archangel. Now we infer that Gabriel is an archangel. And who else? What? Lucifer. And who else? Michael. Michael, Lucifer, and Gabriel. All right, 3 archangels. Archangels. And then we have the word arche pikapos. Arche pikapos. Arche pikapos. That means archbishop. One that looks over a flock, the head of the flock watchers. Sometimes there's several pastors in a church. Sometimes there's several pastors in the church, and this is what we call a senior pastor, an archepiskopos. Epi means what? Upon. And we have arch, epi, and scopos. What word in English do you think comes from scopos? Scopos. What? Scope. Rifles have scope, and then you have telescopes, and you have telescopes that look at the stars, and you have binoculars, which are telescopes, but there's 2 of them. All right? Archepiskopos, and then we have archerus. Archerus. What's archerus? High priest or head priest. Jesus talked about the head priest. The head priest, the high priest, all right, are from this same word there, architecton. Now, what does the word technos mean? Huh? Technos. Brother David. A live birth. A live birth. How in the world does that get mixed up with this? Okay, let's look at it a little bit more. A live birth. Huh. To beget. For a live birth to happen, somebody's got to beget them, don't they? They have to be begotten. All right? And the Apostle Paul went into this area, and he stayed in Corinth for 2 years, and he was the head begetter. The head begetter. That's a term. We get a word technician from this also. Our word technician. A technician. By the way, Jesus was probably not a carpenter. He was probably a stonemason. Every term used of him is stonemason terms. All kinds of stonemasons. By the way, there weren't many carpenters back then. A carpenter basically made a little furniture item and maybe worked on plows, a few things like that. But they didn't do any building with wood very much at all. They didn't build wooden houses, basically. They built stone houses. All right? A master builder. So the word tektos can mean carpenter, a technician, but it probably means stonemason when it refers to Jesus. Now the Apostle Paul said here, I am the first begetter, I am the head begetter in this town here. I am the one that went in there and talked to you bunch of heathens. Remember what Corinthianize meant? What did Corinthianize mean? To corrupt. This was a corrupt bunch. They had a brothel up there with 1,000 prostitutes that went down through here, and this was the most ungodly city that you could possibly ever imagine, Corinth. They had philosophers, stand-up, filthy comedians. We have plenty of that today, don't we? This is in the streets. This is all over Corinth. And the Apostle Paul got up there and started preaching Jesus. In a place like this. In a place like this. He said, I was the first begetter. A foundation I laid upon. I placed upon another. By the way, what is the only found? Matthew 16 and 18. Who is the rock? Jesus, not Peter. Jesus is the rock. All right? And Jesus is the foundation upon which every church, true New Testament church, is built. It's on Jesus. Not Joseph Smith. Not Brigham Young. Not Charles Taze Russell. Garner Ted Armstrong or Herbert Armstrong. Or any of that type. Mary Baker Eddy. Or any of those things. That's not foundations. That's not the right foundation. He said, I am the first begetter, a foundation, the foundation I laid or I placed upon another, but he builds upon each one, but let him see how he builds upon. Gabby, could you bring that book up here again and talk into this microphone and read these last few verses in the Amplified Bible for us? If that's all right. From about, where did you, last one you read? Was that 3 and 7? And you read 1 Corinthians 15:58. All right, come up here and read up here to verse number 10. No, verse number 10.
7?
Yeah.
Okay.
From 7 to 10.
So neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but only God who makes it grow and become greater. He who plants and he who waters are equal, one in aim of the same importance and esteem. Yet each shall receive his own reward, wages according to his own labor. For we are fellow workmen, joint promoters, laborers together, with and for God. You are God's garden and vineyard and field under cultivation. You are God's building. According to the grace, the special endowment for my task of God bestowed on me, like a skillful architect and master builder, I laid the foundation, and now another man is building upon it. But let each man be careful how he builds upon it.
Be careful what you build your spiritual life upon. Be careful what you build your spiritual life upon. There's no room for individualism in God's churches. 3 and verse 11. Thamelion. Gar. Alon. Udes. Dinate. Thene. Para. Ton. Kaimenon. Hos. Estin. Jesus Christos. Now the last verse that we read, Matthew 13:55, Mark 6:3, Romans 12:3 and 15 and 20, Luke 6:48 and 14:29, 1 Corinthians 3:11, which we are going to right now, and 1 Thessalonians 3:2 are cross references to this. And Acts 18:1 through 8 is where all this took place in the book of Acts. For foundation no other is able. Look at the word dinate. What word do we have in English that comes right out of this word dinate? Dynamite. Powerful. All right, powerful. Is able to lay. Thene. Third person singular present indicative passive is able to be laid. That word dinate. And then to lay is second aorist infinitive active. Alongside the one being laid, who is Christ Jesus. I have written down here no Buddhas, no Mohammeds, no Mary Baker Eddy, no Joseph Smith, no Brigham Youngs, no Herbert Armstrongs, no Jim Jones, no Reverend Moons. There's no room for them. Ephesians 2 and 20. Isaiah 28:16, 1 Peter 2 and 5, and 1 Peter 2 and 4 and 5, Galatians 1, 6 and 7, and 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 4. All cross references this. 1 Peter 2, 4 and 5. 1 Peter 2, 4 and 5. Who wants to come up here and read that? 1 Peter 2, 4 and 5. Cindy, you got something? David? You haven't been up here.
Yeah, I was.
Have you? Oh, you did get up here before?
I didn't have my shoes on.
You had your shoes off. Oh, you had your shoes off. Yes. Penny.
Yeah, that's.
Penny, do you have your Amplified Bible in 1 Peter 2, 4 and 5? All right, you want to come up here? 1 Peter 2, 4 and 5. We wouldn't want to scare. All right, 1 Peter 2, 4 and 5.
3. Like newborn babes, you should crave or thirst for, earnestly desire, the pure, unadulterated spiritual milk, that by it you may be nurtured and grow into complete salvation. Come to him, then, to that living stone which men tried and threw away, but which is chosen and precious in God's sight. Come and, like living stones, be yourselves built into a spiritual house for a holy, dedicated, consecrated priesthood, to offer up those spiritual sacrifices that are acceptable and pleasing to God through Jesus Christ.
Thank you very much. What is Jesus? What was Jesus when he talked about the stone that was rejected? He said, "I was the stone that was rejected." What was he talking about? Was there something in history that he was talking about? Do any of you know what he was talking about? When they were building Solomon's temple. By the way, I found a cornerstone is a foundation stone. A cornerstone had to be without blemish completely. It had to be a solid rock. It could not have a crack in it. So they would take a stone, a foundation stone, and they would polish it off and look very closely for any fractures, for anything in it at all. And when they were going to build Solomon's temple, by the way, they didn't build it on location. Every stone was set aside before it ever got to Jerusalem. There was never going to be a hammer, a sound of a hammer or a nail driven or anything when they built the temple. How many of you knew that? The temple is a type of the church in the millennial reign. Okay? Now, we're saved here in this time. And when we get to heaven and we live with the Lord, all of our salvation, everything, all the work is behind us, isn't it? Okay? When an altar was built, let's talk about altars. Abraham's altar, all of these different altars, Jacob's altars and everything. What was a requirement of any altar back in those days? It could not be chiseled stone. It had to be man-made, because that altar stood for what? For Christ. Nothing in your salvation has anything to do with you. Now let's go back to the temple. They moved a lot of stones around, and they rejected a lot of stones, and it was one great big foundational stone that they needed in the temple. In building the temple, that the builders, the architects, rejected. Well, when they got all the stones cut for the temple, they found out they still needed a big stone for a foundation stone. So they went out and they found a stone that had been rejected, and they surfaced it and checked it all out, and that was the stone that was rejected. And that became the cornerstone. And Jesus said, "You rejected me." Israel rejected her king and the kingdom over and over and over. We follow Jesus. We're studying the book of Matthew on Sunday morning right now. And we're in the 19th chapter of Matthew right now. And what we happened in the first part of the book is where Jesus is proving that he is the Messiah. And he proves it by doing all these miracles and providing food, just like what Moses did in the wilderness. And he provided water and drink for them. He turned water into wine. He did all kinds of things. He fed 5,000, and then and many, many people. 15,000, 20,000 people out of nothing. He fed them just like God created food out there in the wilderness like the manna. He said, "I am the true bread that came down out of heaven. I am the true rock, the water that followed Israel in the wilderness." Proving to them that he was Messiah. But they rejected him, and they nipped at his heels like dogs all along, rejecting him. And we follow the Savior, the rejected Savior, the rejected cornerstone. He said, "I am the cornerstone that was rejected." That one that they finally found that became the head of the cornerstone. I am that one. I am that one. For no other foundation is anyone able to lay besides the one having been laid, who is Jesus Christ. Who is Jesus Christ. Well, we'll quit right there, and we'll come back next week. Is that all right with you? We'll quit right there. 13 and verse 12. Yeah. Yes.
The para, where you got beside or alongside.
Yes.
The translations seem to say other than or except, which seems different. I mean, does this mean other than, even though it's alongside?
Yeah, it means here other beside it. There is no other foundation beside this one. Nothing beside this one.
Right.
Yeah, this is the only foundation. And where did we start? From 7 tonight? Where we start? 7 through 12. Well, thank you for enduring those hard seats. What? 7 and 11. 7 through 11. Thank you, Brother John. 7 through 11. 7 through 11. Let's have a word of prayer. I want you to go out and do what? Do something eternal. Do something eternal. Brother John, it's good to have you here all the way from Shafter, California. Brother, would you dismiss us in prayer?
Thank you, Lord, for this day. It's a blessing, Lord, to be here, study your word. Thank you for the wisdom and the understanding that you give to us
right. Just remember one thing. Your beatings are not in vain. All right? Your beatings are not in vain. That one thing you got out of Greek tonight that you wouldn't have got it any other way. Not even the Amplified Bible gave it to you. All right. Go out and do something eternal.